All right. Hello again, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining. Here we are again to another asynchronous sketch along session. And like I discussed in class on Friday, we're going to be transitioning our next project into sketching the unbuilt or designs and that have yet to be realized or your student work. I gave examples of buildings that had stood and then are now no longer with us. They've been demolished. And in going more towards the example of what you'll be working on for your project, the Unbuilt, I'm going to look at a competition entry that was never realized. And this will be one of the few, I should say. The Unbuilt kind of idea is, in my case, either unbuilt competitions or demolish buildings. I'm not going to spend much time on designs that I did myself. I'm not interested in discussing theory of design for this course, but one iconic competition in the 20th century was for the Tribune Tower. And for those of you that are not quite familiar with it, this iconic view of North Michigan Avenue with the Wrigley Building, the Tribune Tower. Initially, when North Michigan Avenue had not yet been fully developed as it is today, the first major project that existed was the Wrigley Building, seen here in its bright white glazed clay tile brick. Tiles that really reflect the sun very much. It's very bright. It's unusual, especially when you see images of it when it was the only white building in its context. But then this building came later. In 1922, the Tribune Company opened up to an international competition celebrating its 75th year. And Raymond Hood and Howell won that competition. And so that design, we've known, of course, for so long, but it's interesting to go back to see what other designs were part of this. And some of them were quite crazy, unusual. And some of them, of course, are not. They're buildings that pretty much we would expect to see. And so the first place was this, what we see built today, of course, built by John Howell and Raymond Hood, New York architects at the time. The second place winner was by Hillel Saarinen. This second prize is almost similar in a way to the neo-Gothic kind of look of the building here, but there are also notable designs such as those of Walter Gropius, who designed a tower here that is a kind of vertical version of his Bauhaus in Germany. And the one that we are going to be looking at inserting into this context is by Adolph Loss, his crazy, fantastic ionic column on pedestal. And so I have a few images here. This was actually the sketch that he gave for his competition entry. Love it or hate it, it is iconic and it is memorable. And so it's also very simple. And so when we're drawing this, it's even more simple than what had been built. What had been built is a series of vertical extrusions, flying buttresses, and a lot of tracery up at the crown. So this is referencing the tower of a cathedral, I believe in Spain or France, doesn't matter. Anyway, very, very elaborate. And so I've drawn it many, many times, and it's a wonderful building to sketch, but in our context, we are going to be assuming that this won the competition, it has been built, and we are going to insert it into this context. So a lot of what we see here, we will be drawing, except of course for where the Tribune Tower is today. That's where we are going to erase this from our own drawing and insert Adolph Loss's competition entry. It did not even win third place. It's famous because of it's such an iconic, almost postmodern, well before its time, 1922. Postmodern didn't really come around with those historical references until the 70s or so. That's when we started to see a lot of architectural design that was a reaction to the simplicity and sterile kind of simple lines of Miesian modernism. And so this is going to be an interesting task for us to take on, and it'll relate to your own work as we get to that later this week and next week. So this I'm going to be pulling off screen as usual. You won't be able to see it so well, but I will be making references to it and it'll be posted on Canvas. So again, we are, as usual, I'm sticking to this. I don't really want to venture off too much of looking at imagery and design work where we're elevated or looking down on things, because that opens up a whole nother set of complexities. So we're going to keep it simple. Horizon line near the base of the page. I'm actually, because the image is in portrait, which means a vertical orientation, my page itself is also in a portrait orientation. So the top and the bottom, I think that you can't see. There's a few inches, or maybe an inch at the top and maybe an inch or so at the base that aren't really making it on screen here, but I'll try to move the paper around to make sure that we capture it all. So once we have this established, and now I should also mention that in some of the latest works that we've done, the vanishing points, at least one of them have been on screen, visible on the image. In this case, one of them is so far off to the right that it would be, 10, 15 feet away. So it's relatively flat, almost elevational, looking in one face. And the other one is going to be over here, just towards the edge of our page. And that will only really come into play when we start looking at this face of the new hood, the new building that Adolph Loss designed, which is cylindrical. So this will be the first time we're looking at cylindrical sketching. But then also these buildings also are rectangular, and they are all responding to the vanishing point over here. So the other thing to keep note of is that the Wrigley building, this one, is not following the same geometries as the rest of the orthogonal north, south, east, west grid. This face is parallel to the base of the river, which you cannot see. It's behind this railing. It's relatively consistent with an east and west direction, but then you can see this angle is foreign to the geometry of these other buildings. So these are just simple rectangles. The Wrigley building, it actually has a strange shape. There are two towers. The south tower looks more like this, and we're looking at the southern face of it. That is the primary face that we see here. Actually, more like this. The clock tower is on this face. So that's if I drew this in like a roof plan, the clock tower is like that. That's why we're seeing two faces of it. So anyway, this is going to be our starting point. And again, making sure that we capture all of this on our page. It's important to lay this out with those light lines first, because as you've seen in some of my previous tutorials, there have been times that I have to go back and make corrections. But what I want to start out with is just the front face of Wrigley. And again, for the last few weeks, I've stressed the idea of context. You can, of course, in your design work, focus on just your building, but I'm trying to bring our buildings and sketches to life by showing things that aren't just simply the design that we have in front of us. Also trying to highlight some of the neighboring conditions, which I think is really useful, because then it makes things more relatable. They just are set in a way that brings them more to life. So I'm constantly going back and forth. As I'm drawing, I'm looking back and forth, always checking myself to see how is this angle and this angle consistent with the angles that I see in the photo. So this angle and this angle, it might even be worth, I know most of you, maybe none of you, will print this out. I'm sure none of you will. You'll look at it on screen and you'll have your sketch pad in front of you, but holding this line and just checking, nice and easy to do that, so that at the end of the day, you're not left with some angles that are wildly inaccurate. And so the Wrigley building has a lot of urns, decorative pieces that stack on top of one another. The proportions are very important to get right, because if things start to kind of grow in places that they shouldn't be, or is crushed together, it's very recognizable that something isn't sitting right. So always look at this, and the resolution of the photo might be questionable, but the point here is that we're just trying to capture some of the basic ideas of this. I don't need to see every urn and the detail of all the urns. So the tower, and so here right away, this is the horizon line, which is going to be above, I'm gonna push this up a little, the level of our foreground, which is this kind of balustrade that exists on Wacker Drive, this very ornamental balustrade railing condition, which has, of course, a depth to it, and is running almost parallel to the base of the page. It's probably lifting up ever so slightly as we get further to the right. And then within that, I'm just going to plot this out really quickly. There is a decorative planter that's integrated within it. It's broken up into a series of, in a modern sense, we just call these pickets. I'm not a classicist. I've mentioned that before. I'm sure they have a name. I'm not terribly concerned about what they are. I just know what they look like. So there's broken up. It's not just one continuous picket or whatever you want to call the classical term for it. It's broken up. There's a planter here. There's another kind of almost decorative lighting feature that looks kind of like an obelisk. It has an obelisk like that comes up to a point, but it also has these orbs that are hanging off each face of it. Those are lights. I don't think that they really give off too much light, but they're decorative. And then there is also, I'm going to move this. There is a light pole, which also has a series of clustered lights that are, I'm going to move it a little bit because I actually don't like where it's sited. When a corner of the building comes down, I would like to actually show that corner rather than have something else on top of it. And so I'm going to push it off to the side. The proportions of it are fine. It's really just a series of circles that are then covering other circles beyond. And no need to really spend too much time on how this thing is detailed. You could probably blow this up and draw this in really great detail. It's not, it's nice to see because it gives a little bit of context, but you don't have to draw this. It's again, just like with cars and people, if you're comfortable drawing them and you think they look good, go for it. But I'm not going to say, hey, where is your light pole? That's not the focus of the drawing. This is the street curb. All right, then I come back here and I'm looking again at this. Just planning it out. I'm going to come back and I'll finalize it with more complete lines later. I do not need to show this dual pipe hydrant, nor do I really want to show the bus shelter designed by Robert Stern. Not interested in his work anyway, so I'm going to take that out. I think that the more I go on with the semester, the more you're hearing my personal tastes. You might disagree with them, that's fine. Everybody should have their own likes and dislikes. You can express it freely. You could say, oh, I don't like any of the drawings, the subject matters that Ryan's got me doing in these classes. That's fine too. Actually, kind of would love to hear that. If you like certain things or don't like certain things, let me know what your thoughts are in class. Maybe after class, come up to me and say, oh, these drawings are rubbish. I don't like the type of thing that we're doing here. I would be fascinated to hear that. That'd be fun for me. Anyway, so here we go. The Michigan Avenue Bridge. There are 4 bridge houses here. The railing for the bridge is very much low to the ground. I mean, low to our relative to our, I shouldn't say ground, our horizon line. A series of flagpoles. These are going to be the flags that come off of the bridge. There's a tree. I'm just trying to define that foreground first, things that are going to be drawn ahead of anything else. There's a kind of raised section, and then the base of Wrigley is here. The corner edge is defined by this line, and then the Wrigley building is extremely ornate. And so it's important to break it down into manageable pieces. There is the South Tower, and then there is also the North Tower, which we can only see a little bit of. It's kind of poking out just a fraction of an inch here. It too has an ornamental top, and we can only see a part of the kind of, I don't even know what you want to call it, like a lantern that reaches up as a kind of pinnacle towards the edge, similar to what the clock tower is doing without competing with it. Okay, so now we have set up a good chunk of this, and we want to just break up the way that the fenestration is working. I have not drawn many classical or traditional buildings in this class, so I haven't had to do this kind of thing yet, but just looking at simple breaking up of a facade, it's really just a 4 bays, 1, 2, 3, 4. These lines will come in handy, and I'm not going to draw all of the windows in this building. That would be a large use of time. And when it comes to sketching, it's kind of like just getting down on paper what is needed rather than focusing on every little piece. We're just trying to give ideas. There is a lot of banding in this building, and so down below there are some arched windows. The solid portion of the building is wider at the base. Then there is the ground floor that extends straight off the sidewalk. There is banding here, and that's where there are grouped of 2 floors. I believe it's actually, I think there's a Ghirardelli used to be in this space. I used to go down there to sketch the river in the colder months. A central archway that indicates the point of entry be on the same bay as the clock tower itself. This turns down. So because this face is not, it's just angled, it's not like turning a 90-degree corner, it's only going to change geometry slightly here. And it will become more evident as you go up the building that that angle is becoming more and more severe. But at the base, it's very subtle. Okay, so then this banding, it's almost as if if you were actually take these lines and continue them, there's a vanishing point that face is set up. So you could actually draw that point very, very lightly, which then will help dictate all of these lines. If you don't want to rely on just matching angles from the photo to your drawing, you could find 2 points, connect those, and then have them come down to your horizon line. That will dictate how those faces are all being kind of radiating from that point. So if I were to carry these down, I'm doing this very lightly because I don't want these lines to show up in the end, but you can see they're all coming down. And this is guides so that when I start adding those punched openings, I know that I'm not kind of going off course and not following some of the rules I've set up. In classical buildings like this, there is a lot of, see, I've noticed something I did here. My clock appears to have missing a small section. And so this is a good example again of a learning experience where you can see something that I may have missed, and maybe you saw that right away. I drew the clock, but then above the clock, there is still another set of vertical elements, almost like recessed, and there are 3 large vertical openings in that face. Above that, there is a smaller recess with a singular opening. And then above that, there is, and each of these have little urns, which are difficult to make out in this photo, but if you have larger enhanced photos of this building, you'll see them. I used to work in the North Tower, so we had a rooftop that was looking straight out. These urns are massive. They're like 5 or 6 feet across or 5 or 6 feet tall. When they're on a building like this far away, they just look like little specks, but up close, they're really substantial. So I know that at just about at every point along this face, at every transition, there is a series of urns. All right, so then there's a smaller kind of drum piece and then an even smaller one on top of that until you get to the spire. So that is more consistent with the way the building is actually constructed with all of its ornamentation and setbacks. The clock itself has 3 bays underneath it. This is, so we're gonna, 1, 2, 3. So this is gonna be 1, 2, 3, and only a few of, like 3 floors of these. Each of these bays is broken up in half. So that means there's going to be 2 floors in this banded grouping, and then another 2 groupings, another grouped window on each one of these. And then again, each one of these bays, there are 4 bays, each one of them is going to be bisected, and then on either side, there's going to be another series of windows. And I've drawn this building many times. I'm just going to show these coming down. Check yourself though to make sure that these are kind of together. You don't want your windows to start falling off and not responding to these lines. This one is very, very almost elevational. It's only changing geometry a little bit as it reaches up towards the sky. So those lines are relatively flat here at the horizon line, and then they just start to splay ever so much until you're seeing this angle, which is not quite parallel to the base of your paper. Okay, so then there's the clock. These are going to be foreshortened a lot. So I am actually not even going to spend the time rationalizing how those vertical elements work, because the only thing I'm really concerned here is to make sure that there is a series of vertical dark openings in this wall. And I'm going to come back and do that later. It's really, this facade is much more evident. And then here, there's just going to be a series of grouped punched openings, and this is the north tower. So there's going to be a hard line here that's going to indicate that line weight is heavy because that's a profiled edge. There's actually a bridge that connects these two. Again, I'm not going to spend that much time on it. Because this is so foreshortened, I'm not going to do much more than tick marks, whereas on this side, I'm going to give these windows a little bit more depth and shape to them, because we're looking at them much more in elevation. But I can come back to that once I've mapped all this out. Here again, these are going to be very, very foreshortened elevations. By the time you get down here, we should be getting really flat. And remember, at the horizon line, everything is flat. That's like, if I were standing on the other side of the river, that would be me. That's my head right on the horizon line. So everything is flat there. Everything above this starts to spread up, and everything beneath it is spreading down. So if I cannot see joints in the sidewalk, but because these are collecting down here, so there I know that there should be a vanishing point right around here where these lines are all coming together and converging. So if this sidewalk was doing the same thing, I could, and I don't see any lines, but I could just, to stay consistent with that, I could start adding joints in the sidewalk here that are all coming off of that same point. So that in theory, this line is parallel, or I should say perpendicular to the point in the distance. So these are all collecting. Okay, so then in the distance here is the Medina Athletic Club Tower. I think now it's called the Intercontinental. But that's another very unusual building, which has many, many setbacks. And I'm just going to be drawing it very quickly. So just because it's kind of a background building, as buildings move into the distance beyond, you want to add less and less detail to them. You don't want to draw attention to things that are far away. You have a focus. In this case, it's going to be the building that had not been built. But I would argue that including the Tribune, or I should say the Wrigley building in this, it's really a composition that both of these buildings, and even today, they kind of form a gateway. So I think that it'll really help the context to show both of them in greater detail. Not to discount what's happening here at this hotel tower, but you can see I'm only adding a little bit, and I might just do a few little tick mark lines to indicate more detail on that with windows, and I'll come back to that when I get to it later. All right, so now we're going to focus on, as we're moving across the page, we're going to look at this building. So I don't know how tall this building is relative to what has been built. The Tribune Tower and this fantasy of a tower, I can only count windows. I can count floors. I am going to make, without actually spending too much time on this sketch, analyzing how tall this is relative to what's been built, I'm going to make assumptions. I'm going to look at how many floors this is relative to how many floors Tribune is, and I'm going to assume this is slightly taller, just given proportions. My image got cut off a little bit here, but I can see a small person standing right at the base of this, so I'm assuming this is the ground floor. And so this is maybe 35 to 40 floors. 35, I would say. I'm going to say that it's slightly taller. And I don't think anybody's going to say, unless I was like way off base, if this thing was like down here or way off the screen. I mean, I could analyze this. I could get into counting levels and assuming what the floor to floor is on each one of them. But quite frankly, I don't really want to spend the time doing that. So at some point, you just kind of go with your gut and I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 floors before the first setback. 9 floors for the first setback would get me to about here. And so in my drawing, that might be like this. So you have to choose an angle. So this building is, you can see, if you look for clues, these lines, I know that those are all the same height and I can see that angle. And then they start to flatten out. It's very difficult to see, but I can tell that they're flattening out these groupings because these are all kind of vertical slot recesses. So it's very difficult to see individual punched openings like I can see on Wrigley, but I can make them out very slightly. And so if I go up 9 floors, I might be about here. And it's really a cube that this is setting up. So then I'm going to come back to set up. This face is going to be a little bit wider than what I've done on this side because this is in more perspective. And so I'm seeing it less in elevation. And this one is a little bit more in elevation. I'm going to give it, the leading edge is closer to me. So I'm going to come up here and then it's going to not be totally flat with the page, but virtually flat with the bottom of my paper. And then from there are 2 setbacks. So they're roughly equidistant, vertical and horizontal. 2 of them. So one stacking on top of another, that's setting up the top of the base. Okay, and then we can see from the image that it sets back a little bit more. It's not, so you could see these, it's not coming out to this edge. That would be like the one-to-one, step, 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 and then the column, it's pushed back a little bit. So I want to keep that in mind. And one of the most subtle things about classical architecture is entasis, which is this idea that the column in a classical sense does not just go straight. It actually curves as it goes up. And this is an important thing to capture because this building is so simplistic that the entasis is really the kind of thing that you might say, oh, this is ridiculous. Why do I care about this little curve? Well, this building is, if you draw it straight, you'll notice that it's not quite the way that it was intended. So I'm just curving it slightly. And then I'm going to have a circular, semicircular top to the column. Now I'm going to go back. I'm going to do a check. Does this look proportioned to me? Honestly, I think I drew it too tall because look at my base. My base is shorter than the photo, but the shaft of the column looks to be the same. So I think I'm too tall. So proportionately, I should probably. I'm looking for my kneaded eraser. If I start erasing too much, I'm going to be left with a bit of a mess. I found it. So for those of you using kneaded erasers, by this time in the semester, you might have noticed that it's getting a little bit less flexible than it started off with and darker. So it might be time, even I can tell that I might be due for a new one. So I think that my column is too tall, just based on the proportions in the photo. So I'm going to go back and try this again. I'm going to come back a little bit more, just a fraction of an inch back. Still maintaining some of the emphasis, the curve. And then rounding off the top. You know, you have to imagine if you were to cut this at a low elevation, it would be very, very flat. It's like that's the drum if it were cut there. The higher you go, and I'll talk about this is because we're going to have to think about how these windows make that arc around the drum. So the higher you go, the more you'll see the curvature. And it's important also to understand that as this curves around, things flatten out before they would start wrapping around the blind side, the side you can't see. So you don't want to have something like this. You know, that angle, you want to bend this just enough to make it look like it's wrapping around the corner. Or I should say the edge, there are no corners in the drum. But then as you go higher and higher, that angle reaches up higher and higher. In the middle, I should say the point that you're connecting these windows with is raising higher and higher. So I want to make sure that I've got this. And as I'm drawing it, wow, this is, I have not seen anyone draw or render this building in context before, but boy, it looks even more stunning than I would have imagined. When you look at it on its own, it's kind of a scary looking building, but then when you actually put it up next to other buildings that you can recognize, it's even more terrifying. I can understand why this didn't place. It's more of like an amazing kind of, can you believe this person actually thought about doing this and this could have been built? All right, so now the last thing to consider in the terms of massing is this idea that there's a cap on the top of the column that is aligned with the same geometries and vanishing points as the base. So one of those vanishing points is way off page, and the other one, if I use these lines as a base relative to what I have just determined, the groupings of floors here I can make out, and hopefully you can see this in the image on screen. There's going to be a point, I'm going to say roughly here, if I look at proportions. And again, this is maybe difficult for some people because you have to kind of use your best judgment in proportions and scale. So part of this is you're gonna wrap around it. So the shaft of the column is sitting directly underneath this kind of top cap. So this is really how I would expect this angle to be, roughly speaking. If I take these and come across, if I take this angle and go all the way down to my vanishing point, or I should say my horizon line, that's where my new vanishing point is for this building. Wrigley has its own set, which this face is not necessarily parallel to that face. You could assume that they are the same, and then your lines would all be coming off of that, the point that we've established for this edge, or they're slightly different. It's hard to tell, so it's really a judgment call. I could use this, and then that's easy because then I can take this point and then go straight down to this vanishing point, which I've established. And I'm pretty close to that already. This one too, I'm pretty close, right? I've got a lot of lines working there, so I want to clean that up a little to describe this better. But this is really, without getting into too much, I might be a little tall, but it is a tall building, and I don't know. I might want to bring it down a little bit. Maybe I've overscaled it. I don't know. It's part of what you need to work out when you're looking at your own designs is how I'm looking at this as a tower, a skyscraper, really. And so is this consistent with where we should be at this stage? I think that without getting into too much analysis and figuring out how tall the existing tower is, how many floors, if you're using the same floor to floor, how tall is that? I'm gonna keep it like this. When I finalize these lines, I might shrink it a little bit. Because if anything, I think it might still be a little bit too tall. Right? So if that's my base, I'm shorter now than the photo, but I also know that the height difference between these two buildings is probably this one. I believe this is taller, just as a hunch, but not by too much. And I can see here that this building, Tribune, the way it's been built, is probably about here. And so I'm thinking I might actually want to come down a little bit. I'm trying to give this some reality. Is and actually it looks scarier the taller it is. So proportionately, if I want to shave off some height, I also have to shave off width, assuming my proportions are correct. So now I'm going to bring it down a little bit. And because I was able to hold off on pushing too hard on that graphite line, I can save this. And if I still see some of that light line work there in the background, I can come back and add a sky or a solid tone or something, and it shouldn't be too evident. Okay, so now I'm looking at coming back, adding a more slender column. Giving a little bit of that emphasis, that curve to this. And this also means that I know that this building has the main tower. It also has a courtyard and a very small annex off to the side, which you can hardly see here. That looks like there's a kind of articulating arm of like a cherry picker or something here. But behind it, there's a small annex building there with a courtyard. The building that lost the competition doesn't have any of that. So the street frontage there will be much smaller. And so that might actually mean that I'm going to see much more of the athletic club tower than is currently seen, because the Tribune Tower today with its annex is wider. So I'm basically taking this entire thing and shrinking it. You can see the old edge was there, the new edge is here, which means proportionately the shaft of the column is also going to get shallower. Okay, but the curvature here then also has to be updated just a little bit. It's still reaching towards the sky, pushes up in the middle more. It's more flattened at the base. Okay, then it's a little bit difficult to see exactly what's going on because the existing tribute tower also has another leg off to the east here. This one seems to have some odd colonnade at the top of this, which then begs the question, if this had been built, would there be a gap here? Was there a plan for something else? Was there another side to this? Because the next thing I have to do is look at the photo. There are two glass towers which have been built within the last 20 years. You have to kind of look at the drawing that you've got in front of the image, the photograph, and determine where now do I place that leading edge of both of these towers, right? Because those towers obviously would still be there no matter what is, I mean, in theory, they would still be there. So I want to try to locate them accurately. I'm going to place one of them here. And I'm just looking proportionately, where is that relative to what I know has been built? So roughly like this. And this building I have not been, this is like a rental or an apartment building. maybe condos, but it has a very, very deep recess, almost like an amenity deck, which is in shadow all the time. And then it has a small mechanical penthouse. And right behind it, the same architect did this building, which is in green glass. This is blue and this one is green. Right next to it, kind of. And then the question is, well, and I had this existing Tribune Tower here. What do I do? I don't know how this is meeting the ground. I'm seeing much more of it than I would if that Tribune Tower was never built. So it's kind of like up to your interpretation. How do you want to complete that? But before I get to that, I'm just going to come back and draw this, which was originally the Equitable building. I don't know what it's called now, but if I were to carry this line, it comes to the athletic club tower about there. And so I'm going to kind of just eyeball that and say that that's going to be the edge of my Equitable tower. And then again, when you're planning these, just to carry, once you get here, you're flat. Remember, that's going to be our flat base where our horizon line is. And then it starts to build up. These lines can be referenced. They should all be parallel, like coplanar with one another. And they're flattening out. Okay, so Adolph Loss did not extend a kind of eastern wing to his tower. I am just going to draw something that looks like it's reasonable. I maybe just take a reference from what has been built. Because I'd rather show something in the foreground there than nothing, than just having these glass towers come all the way down, because those glass towers are like 2 blocks beyond. And I don't want to draw things that, like there's a big hole in the city there. I'm going to come back. There's some nondescript buildings here. I'm going to try to get that in. It's more than there's some trees, landscaping. So this is really it. This is taking out Tribune and adding Adolph Loss's competition version of it. The last thing then, that when we look at this, the flutes, a flute is in plan, and you can, this is not a good representation of it. The circle of the column in plan, the flutes are the little recessed parts that climb up the side of that look like this. So they're like little semicircular, and those rise all the way up the tower, the shaft of the column. And so that's going to be the final piece of the puzzle for grouping this together. And of course, as you have the leading part of the drum, the part closest to you, they're spaced out a little bit. They start to grow closer and closer together, very subtle, but it's there. And this will help create the illusion of a curve. So, and again, I'm going to come back and do these more finalized, but you could see I'm going to leave these a little bit wider. And then there's going to be the top of this is going to stop them just short of the top of the drum of the shaft of this column. So they're going to come up and stop. So that's really the construction of this drawing. Wow, I'm kind of happy this wasn't built. Wow, that is just even more scary. I keep saying scary. I shouldn't call it that. I just think that it's really a powerful piece of architecture in a way that it certainly gets emotion. It almost looks like just the scale is so beyond anything that's ever been built as a singular column before. Normally you see these kind of things in a park or something where they're quite slender and they have a little sculpture of some kind, or they're part of a Greek temple that has been in ruins. And so we see it as an old piece, not as a skyscraper of this scale. So I'm in a good spot with all of this right now. And so I'm going to just lighten up some of the line work, because now I'm going to go back, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use exclusively black colored pencil for the building. So this is just me kind of taking a little bit of the heaviness out of my line work for construction. And now I'm going to go back, and I have to make sure there's a lot of detail here. And so I really want to make sure that I'm being careful with how much attention I'm giving to each one of these elements. So I think what I'm going to start off with is just very, very simply creating form. I'm going to come back with my black colored pencil now, which is going to be darker. I'm not going to hold back from, I'm comfortable with my line work where things are laying out. And so I'm just coming back to adding a little bit more value to the line. Okay, so what I want to do, this is not going to smudge very much. Black colored pencil, as you've probably come to realize, doesn't smudge too much. It still can, but I'm just going to come back and start adding a little bit more tone to the foreground. And I wanted to start with the Wrigley building, but then I realized I want to focus on this first because being in the foreground, I don't want to come back to it again. All right, so I'm gonna just amp up some of the line work here. Just quickly, I'm not spending a lot of time on this. Indicative line. Since the photo that I have doesn't actually show anything growing in it, but I can add things to it. So rather than focusing on the detail, construction of this decorative balustrade or railing, I just do a series of, it's like use your imagination there. I'm not, again, expecting anyone to draw these things. Each one of these little elements in its, 5 different parts to understand how that comes together. That's not important to me. The pencil, of course, goes dull extremely fast. Some of you may have actually bought these. They're called Prismacolor Very Thin. I've been buying Prismacolor Premier, which are softer and wider. Prismacolor Very Thin are supposed to be, just as it says, thinner, and they're also harder. So they are supposed to be more for details. They don't need to be sharpened as often. So you might want to get some of those if you are tired of uh, having to sharpen your pencil so often with the Premier. Okay. So now we're coming across here, we're getting to the point where we have this decorative kind of obelisk that is also treated as lighting. Yep, some of you are probably like, oh, now I understand why he doesn't want us to draw all this classical stuff. Takes, you know, a lot of finesse and a lot of guess game and work around different things to make them look appropriate, which for our purposes, I don't really want people to spend too much time on, although it does help a drawing if you are able to spend time on these kind of things. The context as a composition is really, it comes together a little bit nicer when you've got that foreground. Okay, so then you can come back and just add a little bit of the suggestion of that balustrade. And make sure that you put another layer or two of paper underneath because Prismacolor, you got to start pushing hard on your paper to get those details in. which will then be reflected in your next drawing if you're not careful about protecting it. Okay. I'm going to use the side of my pencil just to indicate a shadow line where the curb is. And even something almost of a shadow, or the noise of a sidewalk that can come from where a vertical surface runs into a horizontal surface. Very, very light line work to a curb and gutter. You know, if you start working with a lot of civil engineers, you'll start to appreciate the inner workings of the edge of a road. You know, it's not just a horizontal goes to vertical. There's a whole language about how these things come together and catch basins and so many things for you to look forward to working as an architect. Things you never thought you would ever need to know about. Like, for instance, as I look at this image, this dual pipe hydrant, I have within the last few months learned everything there is to know about dual pipe hydrants and why we have them. And you thought that architecture was going to be just fun and games. A prime example of the soft nature of Prismacolor breaking on me and breaking again and again. I have a off screen here. I have a collection of dead Prismacolor points. So as much as I love when Prismacolor works well, and it starts to break, it's not a fun day. All right, so what do we have? We got a basis here for some foreground. Okay, then I'm going to get into the actual. You're probably thinking, but Ryan, you spend way too much time on this context stuff. I get it. You like it, whatever. Wrigley is important for this conversation. It is context, and I'm going to start moving my paper around just so that it's more easy for me to work fast. You can, of course, and will be pausing me from time to time if you want to, work as you're watching me. The groupings of these are important. The front of this building, as we look at it almost in elevation, is important. And I'm using line weight, so you can see that I'm lightening up. The vertical kind of bays here are important to capture, but not with our heavy line weights. And then there's another banding here. A more pronounced series of bandings at the base, where these are going to be groupings of two windows between each bay. I don't believe that they're structural bays. They look awfully close together, but they're just a way of breaking up the facade. Another horizontal break. The verticality of those bays comes through. There's a large single opening underneath each one of these, so they're no longer broken up into two parts. And then the largest and this is at grade. The building continues beneath this, but it's under the ground floor. The ground floor is represented by the space where you enter the building off of Michigan Avenue, but then because this building goes down further towards the river level, that there's another, that's where these smaller arched window openings are. Okay, so with my colored pencil, I just do a series of vertical strokes, 1, 2, like 1, 2, 3, 4, really quickly in succession as I move my pencil back towards the right. And I did say that I'm not going to draw every window, but I want to establish that relationship of the windows at the top before I start to kind of degrade them and they kind of go away from the groupings that I have above. And the vertical groupings and these lines can also fade as well. So you'll see I'm going to hold an edge. I'm going to hold this edge. Just a few vertical swipes. Its partner pair of windows here. And I'm starting to lessen up. So as I go across, I'm gonna hold this. Verticals just a few. And then I'm gonna start to fade them. You see how they become lighter and lighter as I get to the base of the drawing, the base of that elevation. You can, I'm not stopping you. I'm not gonna say you drew every window, that's bad. For the sake of this drawing, I'm just trying to show you how it can be daunting to draw a lot of punched windows. It can be more than you want, but you don't have to draw them all. And here, there's groupings of windows, and I'm simply, and this foreshortened elevation, I'm just going to draw floors like this, window groupings. A lot of horizontal striation. The ornament that we kind of just distill into very basic forms. If you were to actually analyze this building, you would realize that it's just layer upon layer of ornamentation. And for a sketch, it can be daunting. You don't know where to begin and where to stop. So some people get frustrated because they feel like they've spent a day working on just a part of the building because they don't know how far to go. And so I'm trying, I guess, I've stayed away from a lot of classical architecture. Sometimes because people get caught up on the details, and that's not really what the design process is about, especially since we're not studying classicism in school. We're working on contemporary design work. And so I'm just showing a distilled version of this for now. I just think this is a good example of the unbuilt that you'll be working with. So unfortunately, it also comes with some classicism. Maybe unfortunate is not the right word, but that's what I'm going to stick with. All right, so we're coming down to the crown of this building. There's a series of setbacks and then this drum. So this drum is actually taking kind of referencing how the curvature of this as we come across, and there's a series of vertical openings within that, another series of decorative motifs, and then an even smaller drum on top of that, and then the spire, which has some breaks within it. Okay. Each time we come to a cornice, it's normally projecting beyond the face of the wall that it's attached to. So that's why I come out and back a little bit. It's not just flat like modern building would have. Okay, then these I know are expressed as they come all the way down. So the horizontal groupings are important on this building, but then there is a pronounced verticality in the center under the clock tower. So I'm going to maintain that. That's an important line. There are 3 windows within that bay. And so I'm going to bring those all the way down. 1, 2, 3. And just remember that each time I do this, I'm starting high and then ending low. And as you get lower and lower in the building, they flatten out until that's where those reference lines that we drew earlier are important to consider. Now, because this is a very foreshortened elevation, I'm simply doing tick lines. The relationship of windows in a vertical orientation are not important because as a viewer, you will not pick that up, but you will certainly pick up the horizontal relationship here. And so here again, I'm going to come across, lighten up, and maybe just at the base, pick it up again. So it's not like I'm trying to draw every window. Just like this. Sometimes at the base, I want to bring it back just so you can see that that's picked up. Okay. There is a entrance condition here with a kind of arched opening. I'm just going to indicate that, and some larger openings here coming across because that banded effect is still in effect down here at the base, coming across, larger openings here, coming across. Looks like there's a opening to Lower Michigan Avenue down here and some guardrail. Okay, so here I'm not even going to spend much time on this side. I'm just going to show some banding to understand that this is also foreshortened. And I am going to just come back here and I'm going to already decide my primary elevation that's illuminated is certainly not going to be this one. So I'm just going to do a wash. Trying not to show the too much in terms of line work. It should be a general wash there. And I'm going to add ever so slightly, just a little bit of tone to this one side, because this is not the side, I'm going to say that the majority of light is coming from the right. So that means that this would have to be slightly in shade, but I don't want it to be as dark as what I've done here. And then one little trick, which is just picking up, this is a change of plane, but I still want this side to be illuminated. It's very subtle again, because this building has these kind of angled, it's not just a 90-degree bend between different faces. So I'm going to just add a little bit of tone to this side so I can see that that is changing faces with the side of my pencil. Okay, so now I have the basis. I have the Wrigley building is largely complete, and I'm again just seeing a little bit of the side of the North Tower. So I'm going to come back and just add some very, very general details here. Pencil. All right, just a couple of grouped windows, really. And so those initial drawing of my construction lines are fading into the distance because those are so light that they're hardly noticeable. And this is another profile line. The North Tower and the South Tower don't touch one another. So I know there's a bridge here and anyway, this is going to be, I'm going to shade this just a little bit so that it's understood that that's beyond. All right. And as I get further back again, these buildings will take on less and less detail. So the athletic club, the Medina Athletic Club, this building is also going to be less detailed than the Tribune or Wrigley. It has this kind of funky dome on the top that looks like it's from an Arabic or Arab type of context. They actually have a lot of motifs. There's a frieze on the base of the building here that looks like it's from kind of ancient Egypt. So that's a very odd building. At least for modern eyes, it's strange details. Maybe I should say odd or strange, unusual. So again, I want to keep in mind that this is the face that is going to be in shadow. And sometimes to make things look as though one is in front of another, you artificially increase some of that contrast to make it look that way. Come across, we have some other steps that we can clearly see casting shadows. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much as much that I want to get into here. I could suggest some of those openings, punched openings here, but that's up to you. So now I'm going to come into a little bit more of the forward context. There's a bridge house here, the Michigan Avenue Bridge House. 3 windows, 1, 2, 3. It steps back like a ziggurat. It has a series of steps and then a decorative urn at the top. I can put these in shadow. Single opening. The kind of oculus here. A tree that is in the foreground and just without adding too much detail to that. I can come back and add tone. Okay, then the Michigan Avenue Bridge coming down. Okay, now I'm gonna get to the Lowe's Tower. First things first, making sure that I'm still content with what I've done with the geometries in my initial drawing, adding a little bit more tone to them. The first thing, once I'm happy with it, I'm going to add a wash to these two faces. These are the two that are in shade. I'm having so much fun. I just looked at the clock. Okay. Then, again, following what I've got, I'm happy with that. Take your time to make those horizontal, or I should say the vertical, that little bit of a bend in the column as it comes up. Make that clear. Then there's looks to be some groupings, kind of like banded edges here that are then captured on the top. And then the cap of this, which has to reach across the whole column capital like that. And again, I'm going to come back and do the wash on this. Using the side of my pencil, I'm going to push with a little bit more pressure on this side. And then as I come across, I'm lightening up just slightly, lightening up until that's it. So and relieve pressure from the pencil as I get further, and then I can come back and add a little bit more to one side. The underside of the cap at the top, I'm going to make that dark because this is going to not see as much direct light. And then I'm even though it's going to obliterate some of the previous work I had done on this, I'm going to also show a little bit more tone on that transition between the column capital and the plate at the top. Okay, so this is looking good. Last thing I then want to establish are these slots for where the windows will be. So by talking through this, I'm kind of trying to focus on the verticality between each one of them. As I had mentioned before, making sure that this is some of the more detailed line. Oh, I just broke another tip. So now I'm switching to my very thin. The groupings of these are going to grow closer and closer together as I get to the edge. I am not going to draw every window, but I'm going to draw enough of them to give the idea. As I come into the shaded side, I'm not going to see too much of this anymore. Okay, so I can just barely see some of those bandings that I had set up from before. And so I'm just going to come back. I'm going to establish with between each of these flutes. This is going to be my base constraint. That's coming all the way down. I can see that. I want to then follow the curve that I've set up behind. I don't like this one, of course, is going to be number one. It's going to be the most severe. And this is the tricky thing here. This is going to be trying to give the illusion of this thing curving. Not an easy thing to do. So you might want to come back. I'm going to do it myself and just give a little bit more definition to these as reference points and reference planes. It's flattening out as I get to the base here. knowing that each time I draw one of these, it's helping to define the geometry. So unlike the Wrigley building where it's a flat facade and I just fade these out, it really doesn't really help much to draw all of them because you understand it as a flat facade. Each one of these is actually helping to define the geometry of the column. So if you start leaving a lot of them out, that could work well, but it could also mean that you're not able to help the viewer understand that curve as well. Because there's virtually no other relationship that you see I drew these lines, but you don't see them in the building. They're not there. I drew them as just a reference point for myself. And each time I draw one of these windows, it's just a quick up, down, up, really, really fast. Some of you probably realized that I had broken my normal colored pencil, both of them. So here now, when you are drawing cylinders and a shadow is cast upon them with an overhang like this, I like to just add a little bit of a top, knowing that the way that the shadow hits around a square object, casting a shadow on a drum is going to create it's not just like a single line that goes all the way up. If there's something on the top there, it's going to behave a little bit differently. So I arch this up. Nail set. A series again of punched openings here. I'm not going to count them. I know there's more than I want to count. That's all I know. I have about 10 minutes left before I start going overkill on this drawing. So the punched openings. And now I'm looking at this. The drawing itself looks kind of muddy. I can't really make out everything I want to see. But this drawing, I can tell that looks like there's wider windows on the corners. And then just simply a series of punched openings in between. This is that colonnade I mentioned earlier. All right. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to this other building. Again, I want to make sure that I can get to all these within the next couple of minutes. I know that you can fast forward me or shut me up whenever you want. These are the buildings that Optima has designed here, mechanical penthouse. Again, three-dimensionality, want to shade one of those faces. Likewise with this one is a bit taller. It also has a beautiful mechanical penthouse, as most buildings do. Some are hidden better than others, but this one is not ashamed of it. And that side gets. And now the building that I don't know what to do with, I'm just going to kind of follow what has been built, even though that's technically not, I would assume not the way that the Adolph Loss building would have had it. And again, I don't want to show too much. I just show some really quick horizontal lines here indicating slab edges, and then very lightly a series of verticals that, again, just to indicate this is a curtain wall building. It doesn't have to be much more than that. The building here, the equitable, that's going to be kind of framing the right edge of the image. Flattening out as we go, don't forget that. And then there's a kind of, just like Mies would have liked, a raised area, the recessed condition down below. Again, curtain wall here. I can add some tone to this. This is the shaded side. Don't want to make it too dark to make it appear a focal point. And I could always go back and add just the suggestion of punched openings on the athletic club tower. Or maybe even a little bit more context here. There's a tower, some really nondescript, these kind of buildings that just you don't even realize are there because there's nothing to them. Okay, then we have a few more punched openings. So as I look back, I can see that I've added a lot of contrast to this building in the foreground. I should say the focus of the drawing is getting darker, especially here at the top, which is fine because that's really one of the reasons that we're looking at this is the building that has not been built. So someone would look at this and their eye would go directly to that as something that they're not unfamiliar with seeing. Sometimes I like to just give a little bit into the foreground here. This is a trick that I just do, and some of you might not have to do this. It's not that critical to the composition. And I'm just going to come back. I haven't talked about much with regards to skies, so this is really up to you if you want to add something to it. Sometimes I add a sky because when you do something in the background in the sky, sometimes I feel like it lifts some of those objects in the foreground off the page a little bit better. So I tend to do a kind of vertical line work. And as you remember, I had my original tower that was kind of a little bit too high. I shortened it, but I can still see some of those lines back there. And so sometimes this can help as a kind of way of concealing some of those previous line work mistakes that or errors or reconsiderations, however you want to call them. And so this is really, I think, a successful drawing that I would like to see. sometimes I find this to be an enjoyable experience, and I know that drawing is not quite the excitement that I find it for most people. But I would like you to consider something like this is not a contemporary architecture, of course, but and sometimes that makes you feel like you might have to add a little bit more effort to it to make things read the way they should. But an interesting design here by Adolph Loss, and interesting to see it in context. I've actually not seen this drawn before, so I thought it would be a fun opportunity to give it a shot during this time where we're working on building or drawing things as if they had been built. And so, what a interesting thing to see had it ever actually come to fruition. Um, it's even more surprising now that I see it in context. So I hope that with this, it'll be the kind of thing that you'll have also, given that you're drawing these by hand and you can see these things. Maybe you're already familiar with how they look in context because you've been able to model them three-dimensionally, but I think that it's fun to see things develop in context when you draw them by hand as well. So I'm going to probably keep working on this a little bit, adding a little bit more contrast and tone to this just to make things pop a little bit more. My foreground is looking a little bit too much kind of as part of its meshing in with the rest of the composition. So I'm going to come back here and kind of add a little bit more line weight and tone to this to make it appear as though it's lifting off the page more foreground than the rest of the drawing. But thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing how you represent your own designs and your unbuilt work. So thanks again for listening, and we will talk more in class on Friday.